So having intimately watched and managed mum and dad, the thing that is weaved all the way through it, as I said, is who's going to do this for us? So I've watched their cognitive decline, and so who's going to do this for us also prompts some practical things about, okay, what have we got to do to manage this situation later on in life? It is really, really important to understand that I will not be the same person in 20 years' time. I can't predict who that'll be. That is one of the lessons that I've learned through this, is I've watched my parents change from those confident people that could, they had a problem, they would go and sort it out, where now they can't, or at the time they could, they gradually couldn't. And so from our perspective, what does that mean for us? What have we got to do now to make sure that we can do the best we can for us as we age without that support? Because the other things it's taught me is that the social welfare system is a support to families dealing with people who need care. Make no mistake, that's what it is. And so you can't rely on the social welfare system to be the primary caregiver for people who are aging. And so we've got to be in front of the ball for that, because if we're not, it can get out of control really quickly, and it will get really messy. Welcome to the Full Stop Podcast, hosted by Sarah Lawrence, Berenice Smith, and me, Michael Hughes, where we, with all our special guests, explore what it means to be childless, and in the hope we can help you feel validated, seen, and inspired, and in turn, help you navigate this very different life to the one we thought we were going to have. This episode, we talk about the subject not many people want to discuss: aging without children. Now, this has been prompted by the experiences of both Vicky and I caring for both my parents. Now, this will not be an easy listen, and we only scratched the surface of the list that I've got. Now, please note, we talk about end of life in this discussion, so please, go gently. Welcome to the Full Stop Podcast. Now, if you didn't know, Vicky and I have been caring and managing for my parents now since 2018. And we have intimately watched how they have changed and what skills and knowledge they and we need to navigate the situation. Now, whilst we're doing the best we can for them and still are, what is we through this experience for us is who will do it for us. Now, one of the criticisms from Storyhouse last year was in the Aging Without Children section, there was a lot of fear. And so the girls have graciously allowed me to curate this episode, and my intention is to try and alleviate some of that fear and some practical things that you can take away from the end of this episode. Now, as we have a global audience, it will be impossible, and in some respects irresponsible, to give specific advice due to the hugely different social systems. So again, the aim of this episode is to arm you with questions backed up with context that you can take away and do your own research. Now, this is going to be a hard listen, and it will be a range of emotions with you. Before we start, I want to tell you this statement. The person you are today will not be the person you are in 20 years' time. And I want you to keep that in mind as we walk through these various aspects of today's discussion. Now, additionally, this will not be a definitive list. Look at it as a starting point for a discussion, a starting point to evaluate your own circumstances. Now, the changes that you will experience because you won't be that person in 20 years' time, they are innumerable. But some of the things that I know about are relationship status, financial status, cognitive ability, health status, mobility, confidence, and resilience. Now, one of the other things I want to introduce you to is what I call life anxiety. We all have this stuff that creates anxiety. We're dealing with it every day. Some days it's under control. Other days it feels like it's out of control. But it's always there. It's constant and it's accumulative. Because if you were to ask me what's stressing me today, it wouldn't be one thing. It will be a number of things, each with their own intensity. And from that perspective, resilience plays a big role in how this is managed. Now, with all that in mind, let's get on with the show.
I just wanted to just say thank you for that introduction, Michael, because I know that from obviously behind the scenes, for context to our audience and to people listening to this, is that you've been talking a little bit about this, but there's been quite a lot going on for you, and for you to come here and to talk a bit more about that and share your learning is going to be an incredibly useful experience, but also a very moving one for you as well, in terms of sharing what you're going through. I wondered if you could perhaps explain to the listeners what prompted you to bring this episode to the full stop today.
So, having intimately watched and managed mum and dad, the thing that is weaved all the way through it, as I said, is who's going to do this for us? So I've watched their cognitive decline, and so that who's going to do this for us also prompts some practical things about, okay, what have we got to do to manage this situation later on in life? And it is really, really important to understand that I will not be the same person in 20 years' time. I can't predict who that'll be, but that is one of the lessons that I've learned through this, is I've watched my parents change from those confident people that could, they had a problem, they would go and sort it out, where now they can't, or at the time they could, they gradually couldn't. And so from our perspective, what does that mean for us? What have we got to do now to make sure that we can do the best we can for us as we age without that support? Because the other things it's taught me is that the social welfare system is a support to families dealing with people who need care. Make no mistake, that's what it is. And so you can't rely on the social welfare system to be the primary caregiver for people who are aging. And so we've got to be in front of the ball for that. Because if we're not, it can get out of control really quickly, and it will get really messy. I use the analogy
about the NHS as well in this country. It's all very much geared to that. If we think about what AWOC are doing in the UK, and this is specifically a UK thing, then actually, there's an element of that, I think, in what we find in this country. Again, you've said before and prefaced that with, this obviously depends where you live in the world, but I think there's a parallel to that, just picking up on what you've said there about how social welfare is constructed. And it's very much, I think, in my mind, I'm aware of it, and I know it's come up in our podcast audience and in our online community, where it's been highlighted that the words that's been used in our latest election has been family, family, family. And family for the government, I think, and for the NHS can often mean, 2.4 children. And actually it's not that way at all. It's very different. Family has a broader definition than perhaps what society at large considers it to be. And I think that influences how healthcare works certainly in this country. I would imagine it's the same probably across the world. Again, it would be interesting to hear from listeners as to what it's like where they are as well. But I can certainly say that in the UK, it feels like that to me, and from the conversations that I've heard around this as well. Yeah,
it's one of the things that prompted me just recently, a really basic thing, is I had to do so. We're in the throes of selling mum and dad's house so that we can fund their care. And so one of the things I had to do was verify the ID of my parents. And so Dad was relatively okay because he drove a car, he had a driver's license. They had out-of-date passports, which can be used in some circumstances, some not. And so with Mum, for instance, she never drove a car. She never had a driver's license. Now, back in her day, a birth certificate, a bill, something without her photograph on would have been fine. But in these days now, where it's expected that you have photo ID, she didn't. and it's created, it's that life anxiety again. It's accumulating because now it's something else that we need to follow, and so we'll follow through. I hope that people listening to this are able to identify themselves, and that's one of the questions I'd like people to walk away with. How do you identify yourself into the government, and not so much about now, but in the future, because that also has a bearing. An example is Australia is now bringing in or researching and hope to bring in next year a digital ID verification tool so that you can use your phone, use an app that's government based that verifies who you are to whoever needs it. It's not so much your details, but it's more of a token that is exchanged so that the person receiving it can be sure that it's verified by the Australian government. But it doesn't actually have your details in it, if that makes sense. Now, if you don't keep yourself up with technology and that gets into the system and then that gets, becomes part of life, you're behind the 8 ball again. Now you have more of that life anxiety that's accumulating. And when you are that different person when you're 20, I can tell you that my mum and dad would have just went, too hard, can't do it.
Yeah, that's
and
why.
So that's where, again, another example of you can't think with the mind you've got now. You've got to think that you will have a lot less cognitive ability.
That's so true. I mean, I do some work around digital exclusion. It's like it's a big thing anyway. But there is some stuff in some charities in Cambridge who do that, and in London as well. And they will deal with kind of digital exclusion. Literally, you go and sit in a room and you take your piece of tech, and someone like me will go, okay, this is how we do it. And it can be literally people just going, I don't know how to switch it on. And if I think about how that thing that I'm sure I said it on the podcast before, I know I said it in the context of Hello Lovely before, but in terms of the full stop, I must say it again in case I haven't. It's that 1985, if you were born in 1985, then you are what's called a digital native. If you're born before 85, you had to learn all this stuff. It's all, and if you think about people of our parents' age, and us, I mean, Craigie, the learning curve that we've been on for the podcast and the things that I'm having to learn at the moment about AI and how that's going to impact on the work I do outside of the full stop in my design stuff too. It's so much to learn that there are solutions that are definitely based in digital tech. And that's a great idea if people can turn on their device. And actually one of the things, can I just say one thing that really bugs me, that really gets my goat, is that age concern. I think it's age concern. It could be Age UK. I forget which one. So my apologies if I get the wrong one and they're listening to this, is that one of them has a page on their website that tells you how to learn about digital tech. It assumes A, you can get on the website, B, you can operate a video, and that you can actually play this video and you can engage with it. So it's assuming a lot of stuff from someone who actually just wants to learn how to get on, but also a lot of it can assume that you have a grandchild, someone younger in your life who can teach you. And actually, it's really hard to teach someone tech. I just wanted to just say that right now from the point of view of someone, I've been done this. I thought I knew a lot, but what I have to do is go back to the point where I know nothing. And I'm scared. That's really vulnerable. It's incredibly vulnerable to be in that position. And quite emotive as well, and there's so much assumption in this world that people can do this stuff. Not excluding the fact that there's also a poverty element to that. People can't afford all these things to do that. And also in some parts of the world, there isn't the infrastructure to do it. There are classrooms across the world that I'm aware of in the other work I do, where there is literally one mobile. That's all they have, and yet lots of books assume that, and publishers assume that people have access to the internet to do online stuff, and they don't. So actually, digital tech is also exclusionary in terms of location and poverty as well. So sorry, minor rant there, but I think that's just important to note too. I went down a rabbit hole, but yeah, it frustrates me terribly, that part of things, from a practical point of view.
Yeah, so we were having a discussion about this earlier, Vicky and I, about this sort of thing, and I've got a permission to tell this story, that she will tell you that she has no idea where all the passwords are for stuff. I will tell you that we have a system in the house where she's able to access all the passwords and usernames for our life admin via a icon on her phone. And so even we now in our 50s are coming across, and this is this is an example of what we were talking about, where if we don't keep up, we're going to be left behind. And it's so important, because one of the other things is I think it might have been you, Berenice, or it might have been Denise, mentioned once that we are only one relationship away from being on our own. And so it's so vitally important that, just one aspect of why it's vitally important to actually keep current with technology in that respect. Yeah. Been an interesting discussions with Vicky and I about this.
I think it's true. I think absolutely true. My husband can strip down a motorbike blindfold, knows how to deal with every aspect of it. Tech, it's actually not interested, because there's also that element too. It might not be that actually people just aren't interested. Why should we be? Who cares really? At the end of the day, I try to go as low tech in the house as I can, because actually it's important that we both kind of can operate the house, but also I don't really want light bulbs controlled by apps. I just want to change a bloody light bulb. I can do that. I don't want an app for that kind of shit. I just can't be bothered with it. Why make it more complicated? The boiler's enough, and that's got a mind of its own. I don't need that hassle, because then actually what happens is that one person can be reliant on that. That person becomes a person who has to explain it. If that person becomes unwell, something happens to them, goodness forbid that, they pass away, you got someone stuck, absolutely stuck. And that, again, is an exclusion too. So, what people's ability to learn things is very different too. I cannot deal with stripping a motorbike down. I can ride one, but I don't know how to strip one down. I couldn't fix it if something happened to it. I can do the car, but I can't do that. So again, the balance of skills is good, but actually if you're on your own, you're reliant on yourself or getting someone in to great expense, which also again is an exclusion of sorts too. The more complicated things become, the more we have to learn individually. And sometimes that learning just isn't there.
Sorry, that's Vicky passed me her iPad.
I wonder what's going on.
She's got a problem with it.
I've been sitting here thinking, because I don't take interest in tech. I just have a bit of a brain block with it. But coming away from tech, I was also thinking the other day, just apropos of nothing, I think I've got arthritis in one of my fingers. And I was sitting there the other day with thinking about this topic in mind, and I think, what happens physically? So, if you think physically as well, your health might decline, you're physically, simple things like being able to open tins and things. What happens then? Because that's kind of, with this one relationship, and you're right, one significant relationship away from being kind of on your own. What happens then? Because you haven't got people that you can necessarily just ring up and say, hey, can you come and open a jar for me, or something like that even, can you?
No. And it's happened to us. So Dad went into the home first, and then Mum was absolutely defiant. So this is another issue we'll talk about in a minute. She was absolutely defiant. I'm staying at home, even though she couldn't cook, couldn't open jars, got to a point where she couldn't actually lift the kettle, any of that. So what it took was, so she also had a care package by the government to have people come round and do things for her. And they were really great because they had a lot of suggestions about here's what you could do. But my mum, being absolutely stubborn and defiant, I don't know if she wasn't listening or if it was, I don't need that. She wouldn't take it in that she could have a kettle, for instance, that was on a pivot. So you didn't actually physically have to pick it up. You just had to pour it. And we would think, why isn't she latching onto these sort of things, even though she'll complain about the fact that she can't pick the kettle up. Now, of course, here's the thing, though. We're able to step in and go, no, we'll get one, put it in, and then she'll learn to use it. But if you've got no one like that, again, I know this is going to be absolutely depressing episode, but if you've got no one like that, what are you going to do? We will have to manage that somehow. And we need to do that. We need to think about, put things in place now. I don't have the answers for this. And this is about just bringing up the questions. I don't have the answers for this. But, yeah, again, it's another concern that we need to take away from here and think about how do I manage that part of my life? Does that make sense?
It does make sense. I think it reflects very much, I think, the learning that we had with my grandmother, my late grandmother, in that she wasn't moving at all. And then suddenly, surprised her, she did her own kind of research, and it wasn't kind of a place that would have been any better for her. In fact, she was in her next house very, very briefly. In fact, most of the time that she was there, she was actually in hospital, as opposed to living there. And a lot of it, I think, is just kind of where we live. And again, it's a very isolated village. It meant everyone had to go there. But the general kind of thing was that the family looked after her. And Michael, you've seen the picture of the bus and the family in the bus, and you know how big my family is. And that's okay if there is the trust there and actually that relationship. And I think perhaps one thing that's crossing my mind as we're talking about this is that I think for us as childless people, that one of the stories I hear a lot, and it reflects a lot in my life as well, is that our families don't know what we've been through. So even if we have family around us who would care for us when we are aging, their experience of life is very different to ours. And so that empathy that comes up is really important, which reflects, actually, it's coming into mind, actually, Sarah, a question that you asked on your social media this week about what do you look for in therapist, in someone that you're going to talk to. And, it was kind of like a lived experience as one of the prompts that you asked. And I thought that was really interesting, and it got me thinking quite a lot, and the answers were interesting as well. But of course, if you're aging and you're on your own and you don't have that understanding of things, then actually, and childlessness is really like in just day to day now, existing at the ages we are as we listen to this podcast right now. It's really important that people have an empathy, and if they don't understand it and haven't had the lived experience, there's a respect for what we are living through. That kind of concerns me a bit, that, as we get older, there's a whole thing I read a while ago about care homes that bring in kids, young kids from schools to help people, getting older, and it helps people that have got dementia. And I'm thinking, if you've been through childlessness and actually within the throes of dementia or whatever is the reason you've gone into a care home, that childlessness is part of your narrative. It doesn't just suddenly vanish. It's so ingrained in you that could be triggering. And how do you articulate that to the nursing home staff? But actually, this would be a problem. It could actually send you into quite a big spiral that could be... The thought just absolutely just makes it, every time I see it, I just literally, everything inside me kind of atrophies with worry that actually, if I was in that situation, I would be that would not be a comfortable place now or then. How do you articulate that to people? And maybe one solution, and I've seen this before with, I can't remember the person's name, it's gone out of my head, but it's a company or a thing called Doc Leaves. And I think Sarah and you've talked about this before, and it's a whole pack that Annabelle, I think her name is, that runs it, and it's a book, and it's a workbook for when you die. But in it's got some really practical questions, and maybe it's a pack that we have, maybe it's a written book that just says, these are my wishes, these are the things that I know now, aged whatever you are, that might be appropriate. This is my life story, this is something about me that you need to know, that if I end up going slightly nuts or something, that actually, which happens to my family a lot, then if I'm in that situation, I do not want kids coming into the care home around me. I can articulate it now, but I can't in 20 years, as you say, Michael. I'm not quite sure whether that's a solution, but it's, I don't know.
I was going to say, when I was doing that end-of-life doula course, there is something called like a living will. And it tends to be, you need to have it in, obviously, a prominent place, and people that you trust and your loved ones know where it is. But if you're childless, then you're probably looking at potentially like a solicitor or somebody advocating for you. But it's whether the level of advocacy is going to be granular enough to say, hey, listen, if I'm in a care home and they bring in children, that's probably or maybe not going to be my thing, and I need to be able to be removed from those sorts of environments. But it's the living will is definitely something to think about in terms of, Michael's right, 20 years hence we are not going to be the same people. If we're still around, we might have health concerns, we may mental, physical ailments. So you need to have a document like that kicking around that your loved ones or people that are advocating for you know about.
Yeah, it's that advocacy again. That came up a lot, didn't it, Story House?
Yeah.
And I think that's it. Just for the benefit of anything, I've definitely got my advocates in mind. I'm thinking about that already. Because I think that's important to have that. My friend Lawrence actually has said about cultivating friendships with people who are younger as well, and that's part of his kind of life philosophy, and I think that's a really wise one. I think that actually is something I shied away from, but again, it's when we talk about kind of like family and about advocacy, and I think a lot of society thinks that family has to advocate. I think historically that's been the way, as you found, Michael, it's, your responsibility to look after your parents. But I'm just thinking if there's advocacy and friendship, trusted close friends that can do that for us. But it's a huge amount of trust, massive trust issue there. And are we okay with that? But then I see fractures in family relationships from childlessness, and think that sometimes friendship is just got so many more, what I want to use. It's got some more recent history to it, I suppose. We know more about each other's most recent past, whereas I think in families we can go back to kind of like, when you were a child you did this. But maybe friendship knows us better, and we're better advocates for people because we know people in the present time at the point where they're going to start thinking about ageing and care. Maybe it's more relevant.
Yeah, we've had a comment, actually. Somebody's put in there that talking about advanced care planning. And it was kind of when you middle-aged brain, you're grasping for the terminology and you can't quite get your brain around it. But it is advanced care planning is kind of what you're looking at, like the living will and the different aspects of, this is what I'd like my care to look like. These are the things that I would need as I get older. But I think, Michael, I guess it's really hard and confronting when you're doing it for your parents, isn't it? It kind of brings it front and centre in terms of what you're doing. Would you be able to talk to that at all? I know it's quite personal, but how have you found it?
I'm going to sound like a really hard-ass bastard now. So the process went that Dad was diagnosed with dementia. Now, one of the great things they did was they went, okay, what does this mean? Not exactly sure where they got the advice from, because, I think I think what they thought about was a will. We need to do a will before you've lost all your marbles. So they went and did that. Then the solicitor said, well, what are you doing about power of attorney and what are you doing about enduring guardianship? And so they got that together, and that is, it's my brother and I share that responsibility, share the power of attorney's responsibility, the enduring guardianship he only has. I'll talk about those a little bit later. But so it was a very matter-of-fact process. It was like, I'll come and sign these forms. Oh, okay, sign the forms. And then, then you're focused on Dad's decline with dementia. And it was at the beginning of COVID. Mum had a heart attack. And so again, I'm in sort of, right, what have I got to do, mate? Didn't really think emotionally about all of this. And then, she went into hospital. They said she's had a heart attack, and the young doctor, what they wanted to say to me was, "What do you want us to resus her? Do you want us to actually try and keep her alive if she has another heart attack?" Whereas the way it came across on the phone, because I'd just been shopping at Woolworths and had shopping in the car, driving home like you do, normal day, and then someone saying, do you want us to keep your mum alive? What the fuck? But again, for me, it was very matter of, okay, we knew mum's wishes because she had actually talked about it. So one of the things that is easy, don't know how, it's a mystery to me, but we all know mum and dad's wishes. We've talked about that quite a bit over the last, might have been 2 decades. Whereas when my brother-in-law, my sister's husband, he finds it really uncomfortable. He's like, so much so, it's like, no. The changes the subject, or he's got to go because he just cannot deal with it. And so, I guess if you're asking me for advice on how it was very matter of fact, but I can see now how that has helped us. I can see that the conversations we've had made that so much easier. And it also, because one of the other things that this process will do, if there are fractures in your family, it will amplify them considerably to the point where you may have siblings that you'll never talk to again. It gets that bad. And strangely enough, we were having lunch with some friends a couple of weeks ago. They are going through exactly the same thing as we are. And one of the big talking points was what it's done to relationships with brothers and sisters. And so... so that's why it's important. I think it's important to have these things clear straight away. Not straight away, but start talking about them now. I know it's uncomfortable. I know it's distasteful, and we don't want to think about our own mortality. But when that doctor said to me, do you want us to resus? I was actually able to go, no. Because I know my mum has always said, if I get to that point and I end up being no, don't want to be a vegetable, no, end it. And so, that was, And we know how she wants to be. She wants to be cremated. We know that she wants some of her ashes in Australia, but we also know she wants some of her ashes at Golders Green in North London with her mummies and her mother and quite a lot of her family and quite a few famous people as well. She'll be in good company. And she also wants some scattered on her father's grave in Italy. And we know that. My dad, I'm just going where mum's going. All right, okay, fair enough. So, it's not an easy conversation to have, but it gets a little bit easier as time goes on. Now, what do we do about that? Well, Vicky and I have talked about that a lot. We've talked about an end-of-life strategy. We won't talk about that now. I'd need to get Vicky's permission, but that's not something we chose to share right now. Probably will, us. But so where was I going? With the end-of-life strategy, we've got to think about what that means for us as well. What are our wishes? Because there is a high chance, and this is another motivator that's got me here talking about this, because there's a high chance that I will have dementia because I've got 2 parents with dementia. Now, I may not, and that's all wonderful, but I can't not think about that. I need to be aware in what we do from now on to deal with that, if that happens, and it is a strong chance of. Did that answer your question?
Yeah.
I know I went down about 6 rabbit holes then, but...
No, you answered it well.
It's a good answer. It's a really interesting one. It's bringing out lots of thoughts for me as well.
So one of the things when you were talking about leaving will and that sort of thing is Vicky and I are actually going to be doing this either next week or the week after. We're going to our solicitors. We're going to draw a will up because we haven't done one yet. And we're also going to set up our power of attorney and our enduring guardianship. And so when you're thinking about advocates and friends, that is something that you will have to talk to them about. Are you willing to?
Yeah. You can't just lump it.
Now, all those things can...
That would not be good.
No. Because there are a lot of big decisions that sit in that. It's not just a throwaway comment where you just go, oh, yeah, look, can you be my power of attorney?
No.
Because it will take up a lot of your time. And if you haven't set up your particularly financial situation for someone to step into that, then it's going to be an absolute fucking minefield, which it's taken me a good 3-4 years to actually get on top of that for my parents. Now, if that was my only full-time job, yeah, no problem. But of course, we've got other shit going on. So much so that, and I've talked about this before, but it's the bank book that I'm always moaning about. So my parents, came to Australia back then, and probably the same in the UK. Bank books. Go down the bank every week, get an update. How much have I got in the bank? Oh, isn't that lovely? Physically, in my hand, I can see what I've got. I can reach, I won't show you where because someone might come and pinch them. I can still reach for their bank books now. And again, technology has moved on. Those accounts can't be used online. So I cannot get on my phone and life admin for them because it's all wrapped up in a passport. So when you think about an advocate, make it easy for them. Set things up so that they can step in and do those things for you. Or even if it's a solicitor, the same thing. Because you're not going to get the best service if it's too hard.
I kind of want to sit I hope I'm not breaching a confidence. I don't think I would be, but my brother and my sister-in-law both are aging without children, chosen not to have children. And one of the things that they've done already is they've sorted out the will and power of attorney. We've had a conversation. I know how to get into their house if anything happened to them, and I know where the documents are. And I went to their house, and it was a bit... We're pretty okay with talking about it. My parents are not. I have to say they aren't. And we need to have these conversations. And this podcast is driving home that I really do need to sit down and go, look, we've got to have this conversation. And we're going to sit here and it's going to be uncomfortable, but we're going to have the conversation. But my brother has been very open about it. Went to his house. He said, this is how you get in. This is what you do. This is where the stuff is. And this is what it is. And this is what we do. And we've had the conversation about it. So I know what's going on with them. The fact that my brother is actually only 3 years younger than me means I'm not quite sure how relevant this is all going to be and how much I can do. We're very close in ages. But I think even if something then happened to me, they've had that conversation and almost it's a rehearsal perhaps for another conversation. And sometimes maybe that might be another way of looking at it, is to just have these thoughts and to think about it and just to start to form something in one's mind. Because you're right, I know from my husband's experience with his parents, particularly with his father, the background to my father-in-law is that from when my husband was in his teens, his father had a very serious motorbike accident that left him with quite a lot of critical head injuries. And that was pretty much kind of how it was for my husband and his three brothers growing up. And so there was an awful lot of care responsibilities there for him. And power of attorney wasn't something that was sorted out until later. And yeah, it was tricky. And a lot of that stuff was all kind of, you say bank books and things like that, which at that time was not too bad because banking hadn't gone fully digital. at that point. But it was still tough to work out. And that was even with everything literally agreed and all the actual handwriting on it and all the proper signatures, because also power of attorney can come too late when people cannot then advocate for themselves and make those signatures they need to. That becomes way more complicated. And we were at that kind of like that tipping point, really, where actually with his dad, it was contested because of his nature of his illnesses and the head injury as well. It became much more complicated, and it took an awful lot of wrangling around things like care home fees and stuff. We were lucky we could carry some of the costs, but again, there is that danger as well that the liability becomes really, really complicated, and the permissions to do something as well. So I think do it whilst one can, one is able to, because then there's less kind of legal implications, because that was messy. Really, really messy and very, very stressful as well, because it wasn't just the fact that we had to pay the care home fees. We also had to make sure that his mum was able to still live in the place that she lived, and that the property that they had before could be sold, and there wasn't a problem with that either. And my goodness me, it was just quite challenging, very challenging to go through, actually. And as you say, it's a lot of work, and it doesn't take much to upset things. It's really complicated stuff.
No, absolutely. So it just makes me think about, I probably should, for those outside of Australia and perhaps the UK, because I'm not quite sure other places, but when we're talking about power of attorney, we're talking about, this is the way I understand it, so this is not gospel. The way I understand it and the way it's worked for us is power of attorney allows you to manage the admin side of someone's life. So you can act on their behalf in terms of finances at the bank or with Social Security, those sort of places. But again, that just doesn't happen. One of the things you have to do is, for here in Australia, is you have to prove who you are before you can do that sort of thing. So there's other steps. So it's about that ID. That's why I brought it up first, because identification is absolutely key. And if you're someone who doesn't travel, doesn't have a passport, if you're someone who doesn't drive a car, how do you prove who you are?
Yeah, true, actually. I got a student car.
How do you prove who you are?
We had this actually with the CIC, wasn't it? With opening up and doing the full stop. I mean, on a much smaller scale and probably less complex scale, it was kind of making sure, Michael, that your ID for Australia, for your driving licence, is actually valid over here in the UK. Because again, the countries can be a problem, but also, yeah, you're right. My passport is actually chronically out of date because I choose not to fly. And also, dog and, we just sort of, at the moment, but, actually, if I do want to sort of leave the country, then I've really got to get that sorted out, because actually my form of ID is my student cards and, my driver's license. I do have a driver's license, but yeah, it's keeping it, and also keeping it renewed, because in the UK, you have to renew your driving permission to drive after the age of, I want to say 70, but maybe it's a bit, I don't know. But you definitely have to go through that process of checking that you can legally still drive, and you have to keep filling the form in, which again is online. We have to do it online. So again, it's kind of assuming that people at that age are okay with going online and have someone around to help them. But yeah, if that's not actually kept up to date, then your passport's probably more likely to be the one that you'd use. Yeah, there's a degree of technology and exclusion over that.
And then so here, enduring guardianship means that you are looking after the medical side of things.
Okay.
So they will talk to you about, some examples are, my dad has a AAA, so an acute aortic aneurysm. Is that the right word? What it means is he's got a very large vein that is popping out like a bike tyre. Remember when kids and you get the inner tube pop out the side of your tyre?
Yeah.
So that's what that is. And so we had to make the decision on his behalf about, well, what are we going to do? Are we going to go in and sort that out, or are we going to leave it? Now, we made the decision to leave it and let nature take its course because of the advice that we got from doctors. But yeah, it's those sort of decisions, and of course the ultimate decision about turning the machine off if you have to.
Yeah.
So that's what those two things are. So from a practical point of view, if you're listening to us in other countries apart from Australia, because I can't speak for the UK or anywhere else, find out what these, if they are available to you, and they will be probably administered by what we here in Australia would call a solicitor. And they will keep those. So they will keep those in their safe. They will be and so that living will, Sarah, for instance, may be that could sit with, the alternatives in different countries. So, yeah.
Okay. It's actually a really interesting observation in the chat that says having to deal with those discussions with patients, it's so much harder to make that decision when something is going wrong health-wise, because when emotions are running high, we are also aware that when the time comes, somebody may change their wishes, and what they wanted 6 months ago is not what they want now. That is a really interesting, because you don't know. I mean, we can sit here and talk about it, and I think, as monks, we can have lots of discussions around these things, but actually when push comes to shove and you are in that position, then I would think that lots of decisions that you thought you wanted change. And that's a really interesting point, and absolutely there should be room for that change, and making sure that someone's around to record that, I think, is important as well.
Oh, absolutely.
To that degree, I'm thinking that this is just processing that comment and thinking that what I might write down in a book might not necessarily be actually what I want at the time. And how these living wills can be binding and not binding, I think is an interesting thing. I don't know enough about the legals to even think where that goes, but I think it's probably something to consider.
That's probably it, isn't it? Legal advice and making sure you've got young friends around you.
Yeah.
Pick up the slack.
And also, I mean, we talk about young friends, but young, childless, child-free friends. It doesn't have to be people.
They get it. Yeah, they get it.
It's not. We aren't the last generation of childless people. Far, far, far from it.
Definitely.
And there's an empathy, I think, as well within child-free community too. It's and potentially, and I don't know this, but it's crossed my mind, and I would be interested. I don't know if this is appropriate. I'm going to ask you anyway, and you can kind of censure and you go, Bernice, that's really just like, But I'm thinking about my brother being organised about this, and I'm just wondering whether perhaps child-free and making those choices and knowing that they are life choices, as opposed to perhaps childless, where we're kind of still always coming to terms, then are they more organised? Do they know this? Is this something that perhaps, in making a choice not to have children, that there's an element of kind of like, okay, that's this is what's going to happen, and therefore I'm just thinking, well, there's a more practical element there. Whereas I know that I have steered away from this, because actually this is not that I wanted children to care for me in my old age. I don't ever guarantee that as being like, we know from AWOC and from family estrangements that doesn't hold water. But obviously, if people have kids around, or close nieces, nephews, godchildren, then of course there is kind of element of younger people around through that relationship. So that isn't true for everybody by far.
I think it's me and my brother have talked about it. I was talking about it with my mum many moons ago after I found out I couldn't have kids, and I said one of my biggest fears was that actually I wouldn't have anyone to look out for me or advocate. And my mum really took that on board, and she had a chat with my brother, and me and my brother, we talked around it, but not directly, because my brother doesn't think about it because he's got kids probably, but we talked around it, and he said, oh no, he said, if I'm still around, then no, that goes without saying. But it's the if, isn't it? It's the, well, okay, if you're not here, if my other half's not here, then I've got to think about what those other alternatives are. But I do think that we are probably ahead of the curve, rather than perhaps people with children who assume, rightly or wrongly, that they're going to have that next generation that will look after them. But I was talking to when I was training to do the end of life doula there was a lady on there. She was fantastic. She works in hospice and she's an end of life nurse for caring for people. And she said the number of people that have family and the family do not turn up until after that person has passed away. And she said you would be amazed, because I think I was talking to her about my my childless concerns, and she said no. She said more likely to see friends sometimes than family. And actually that gave me a little bit of a glow. Like, oh, okay, that made me feel a little bit less unsafe, I guess.
Yeah. I think that's there's an awareness, isn't there? I think perhaps more than perhaps we maybe recognise. Maybe I'm recognising here. I think. Yeah. I suspect it's probably going to leave people with more questions than answers, but
starts that,
doesn't it?
Process, doesn't it?
And again, we're talking about something that's difficult to talk about, and that's what we do. It's what podcasts can be for. We're good vehicles for that.
Yeah, I want to just touch on the idea about friends as well, because again, it's the contrast between what I've seen is in that when my parents pass away, there will be no friends at that funeral. None. One or two friends they had have obviously passed away. And so from a practical point of view, one of the things obviously that, friends can give you comfort and that sort of thing. But I think there's something in the childless space that we need to enhance, get hold of. I don't know what the word is, but really relish and cherish those friendships and continue to make them, because they will be what makes the difference as well. So, for instance, my parents would never have someone come over and have a cup of tea with them unless it was us. And so that was a burden, but at the same time, there was no one just checking in who could ring us and say, look, just been over to see your mum and dad. You might just want to go and, see the sort of thing. So, I think friendships are really important for us. And again, from a practical point of view, I would suggest that, we really need to make sure we work on those friendships. And not to burden our friends, and that can be reciprocal as well. We make friendships so that we can help other people, if that makes sense.
It does. I think we can create a movement, if you like. And we're very much aware that childlessness can sometimes create change and can create movements. And maybe that's the learning from an episode like this, is that here's the thing, here's an issue. How do we deal with it as a collective, as a community? What can we do? Is there something that we can do in the full stop? Is there something that we can get together as kind of bigger groups, because we have other groups obviously doing amazing work? Is there something else that we can feed back to AWOC as well, and other groups around the world? Because AWOC are UK based, but I keep mentioning them because they are fantastic at what they do. But is there other groups in other countries? Is there an equivalent to that in your country that can do that? And how can we facilitate that change? And how can we bring that conversation? Because this feels like a conversation that we need to continue, whether that's in places like Storyhouse, whether it's back on the podcast, whether it's in other communities as well. But I think that from my point of view, I would say, Michael, your experiences are ones that are worth sharing in other spaces as well, not just here. Definitely a conversation to carry on as well. Thank you for sharing it with us today.
So we can. That's all right. And please, if this something is if something has jumped out to you that you want to get in contact with us, I'm not going to give you advice. I might be able to point you in a direction. More than happy to do that. So please, keep the conversation going. Yeah,
we're here to listen to you. Come and talk to us. Get in touch via social media. If you want to come and join our online community, you can do that too. It's all on our website. We would just love to hear from you. Don't feel that you're going to listen to this and think, I don't know what to do. This has brought up lots of emotions. We are around on socials pretty much all the time because of the time difference, and we're here to talk and just chat if you need us to. That's fine.
Thanks for listening, and we'd love to hear your feedback on the topic, and you can do that by finding us on Facebook, Instagram, X, LinkedIn, or you can find our contact details on our website www.thefullstoppod.com, where you can also sign up to our listeners list, and this will keep you up to date with all that's going on in our part of the community. You may have a burning topic we have not covered, so please, again, reach out to us, as we would like to be as inclusive and diverse as possible. You can also sign up for our inclusive online community, and the website will fill you in on how to do that and what goes on the inside. And as always, it's important for us to let you know you are not alone.